Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So you read from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, Chapter 11, Text 13. This is where we left off last time. It's Text 12. And this is the conversation between Jad Bharat, pure devotee of the Lord, and Maharaj Rahugana, responsible ruler, administrator, and king. The middle of their conversation, and Jad Bharat is giving the transcendental science and goal of life, Krishna consciousness, devotional service. He's imparting these messages of Godhead to Maharaj Rahugana, who's taken the appropriate stance. At first he insulted Jad Bharat, not recognizing Jad Bharat's qualifications, that he was carrying full love and realization of the Lord within his heart. And then he corrected himself, committed those offenses, and now he wants to take instruction. He's attracted to what Jad Bharat has to offer. So this is text 13, and these instructions very detailed and scientific. Devotional service is scientific, although a person doesn't have to be a scholar or learned to be able to realize the message of Godhead. And yet there is very scientific presentation also. So this is a continuation of the discussion. This is Jad Bharat. There are two kinds of Kshetrajna: the living entity, as explained above, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is explained as follows. He is the all-pervading cause of creation. He's full in himself and is not dependent on others. He's perceived by hearing and direct perception. He's self-effulgent, does not experience birth, death, old age, or disease. He's the controller of all the demigods, beginning with Lord Brahma. He's called Narayan, and he's the shelter of living entities after the annihilation of this material world. He's full of all opulences. He's the resting place of everything material. He's therefore known as Vyāsadeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By his own potency, he's present within the hearts of all living entities, just as the air or vital force is within the bodies of all beings, moving and non-moving. In this way, he controls the body. In his partial feature, the Supreme Personality of Godhead enters all bodies and controls them. So previously, Jad Bharat explained the nature. He said there's two types of living entities, and in Sanskrit they're called Kshetrajna. It's a living entity, a conscious living being, the knower. There are two types of knowers, two types of conscious living beings. And one type is the infinitesimal jiva soul, and the other type is the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his many manifestations and expansions, Vishnu expansions, Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's not dependent on others, he's all-pervading, he's the cause of creation, and he's perceived or realized by hearing and by direct perception. So he can be realized by hearing about him, but then also sometimes he manifests directly. The living entity can perceive him standing there before them. He says in Bhagavad Gita, I'm understood as I am standing before you by devotional service. So he can be perceived by hearing about him, or he can be perceived direct perception. Like there's two types of scriptures also. There's the type that's spoken directly by the Lord, like Bhagavad Gita, and then there's the kind of scripture that's spoken about the Lord, like the Bhagavatam. So Bhagavad Gita, the Lord is speaking directly to Arjuna, and people that study the Gita and read it, they get to hear that conversation where the Lord is directly being perceived by Arjuna. And here in the Bhagavatam, we get to hear about the Lord and about the Lord's activities. And there are many, many instances where the Lord personally appears before the devotee. And we hear about those accounts in the Bhagavatam also. So we're in the position of hearing. We're not in, at least myself, I'm not in the position of direct perception. Boy, wouldn't that be the day. Right now we're in the position of hearing, and we're quite thankful and appreciative to be in that position. So we'll just go with that. He's perceived by hearing and direct perception. He's self-effulgent, does not experience birth, death, old age, or disease. So, self-effulgent. Self-effulgent. If there's no sunlight or moonlight, it's very dark for conditioned souls. But the Lord is self-effulgent, so there's no need for sunlight or moonlight in the Lord's abode or in his presence either. Self-effulgent. Sunlight and the moonlight come from him. So he's the source of the sunlight and the moonlight. So how effulgent must he be? He does not experience birth, death, old age, or disease. Those are qualities of temporary material energy, material nature, living entity who takes on material body. They experience birth, death, old age, and disease. But the Lord, his body's not material, so he's not subject to birth, death, old age, or disease. His form is eternal. It doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have an end. It never gets old. He's beyond the material nature. It's hard for a conditioned soul to conceive of something with no beginning and no end. Couldn't be. Oh, but it is. Just like someone who's been in the dark for a really long time. Maybe it's been raining, seems like forever. They're not sure if there's any sunlight or not. As far as they're concerned, the sun doesn't even exist. It's so dark and rainy all the time. But the sun is there. It's behind the clouds. So living in the material world, we see everything's born and everything dies. Everything gets sick and old and then dies. Everything that's born. So that's the external manifestation of the gross body produced by the mental desires, which carry the living entity from lifetime to lifetime. So stuck in the material energy like that and identifying with it, how can you conceive of something or someone who doesn't die, who doesn't get old, who isn't born, who doesn't get diseases? Oh, it can't be a person. Maybe there's some energy or something out there, but certainly couldn't be a person and have form or be conscious even. How could that be? We can't conceive of it. But by hearing about the Lord and his activities, he can be perceived. He's the controller of all the demigods, beginning with Lord Brahma. He's the controller of everyone. What to speak of the demigods? Everyone. He's the Supreme Lord. Everything emanates from him, both spiritual and material. He's called Narayan, and he's the shelter of all living entities after the annihilation of this material world. The material world is temporary, and when it is wound up, material creation is wound up, then the spirit souls go back into the body of the Lord in a dormant state, waiting for the next manifestation of the material creation so they can resume their material activities. And along with that comes the opportunity to become free from having to engage in the material activities. He's full of all opulences. He's the resting place of everything material. He's therefore known as Vyāsadeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By his own potency, he's present within the hearts of all living entities, just as the air or vital force is within the body of all beings, moving and non-moving. So this describes the Paramatma feature of the Lord. He's there within the heart of all living beings, Paramatma feature. He's fulfilling the desires of all living entities since time immemorial. He's giving direction as Paramatma. In this way, he controls the body. How is digestion going on? How is the nervous system working? Are we making a conscious effort to make our bodies work? No, we don't even know we don't know how we're growing our hair or our fingernails. We don't know how we're digesting our food. We don't even think about these things. So how are they happening? The Lord is controlling these functions. And he's the Rishikesh, the master of the senses, controller of the senses, Rishikesh. So if the desire of the living entity is to engage in material activities, then the Lord is making the arrangements. He would prefer that they give up this material activity, but You can't force that. So if a living being is determined to try to enjoy and interact with the material energy, then the Lord makes the arrangements. The living entity thinks they're doing it. They don't even know how they're not making any conscious effort to grow your hair or digest your food, or not controlling these things. It's like a machine, it's just going for the ride. The Lord is doing everything. So in his partial feature, the Supreme Personality of Godhead enters all bodies and controls them. Purport by Prabhupada. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya Chaham Riti Sanivisto, Natakshmitya Gyanapavanam Cha. Every living being is controlled by the Supreme Living Being, Paramatma, who resides within everyone's heart. And people may not like that. They want to be the controller. So, but what an illusion. The Lord is controlling everyone, everything. All the bodily functions, the mental functions, everything. The only thing the living entity is responsible for is his desires, what he wants. Does he want to ignore Krishna and identify with the material body, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime? Thinking that he's the controller, that he's doing everything, and getting all the karmic reactions for that? Or do they want to give that up? It's futile anyway. It never fully satisfies. It's always disappointment, frustration. So-called happiness is not really the ecstatic type of happiness. It might be a little elation, but it comes to an end fairly quickly if it's based on the material situation. So they want the real ego. I'm part of Krishna. Krishna's within my heart. He's controlling everything. I better listen to Krishna's representatives and get free from this entanglement. Paramatma, who resides within everyone's heart, he is the Purusha avatar, who creates this material world. The first Purusha avatar is Mahavishnu, and that Mahavishnu is the plenary portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna's first expansion is Baladev. His next expansions are Vyāsadeva, Sankarshan, Aniruddha, Pradyumna. Vāsadeva is the original cause of the Brahmajyoti. The Brahmajyoti is the expansion of the rays of the body of Vyāsadeva. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is endowed with great power. Glowing effulgence of his transcendental form is the impersonal Brahman, which is absolute, complete, unlimited, and which displays the varieties of countless planets with their different opulences in millions and millions of universes. That's from Brahma Samhita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is thus described in Bhagavad Gita. Maya tatam idam sarvam jagata vyaktamurtina matstani sarva bhutani nachaham te sravastita. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. This is the position of the plenary expansions of Krishna as the all-pervading Vāsudeva, Shankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Text 15. My dear King Rahugana, as long as the conditioned soul accepts the material body and is not freed from the contamination of material enjoyment, as long as he does not conquer his 6 enemies and come to the platform of self-realization by awakening his spiritual knowledge, he has to wander among different places, different species of life in this material world. Prabhupada's commentary. When one's mind is absorbed in material conception, he thinks that he belongs to a particular nation, family, country, or creed. These are all called upadhis, designations. One has to become freed from them. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam. As long as one is not freed, he has to continue conditioned life in material existence. The human form of life is meant for cleansing away these misconceptions. If this is not done, one has to repeat the cycle of birth and death, and thus suffer all material conditions. So, as long as he does not conquer his 6 enemies and come to the platform of self-realization by awakening his spiritual knowledge, so this is spiritual knowledge, which means taking shelter of devotion to the Lord. Spiritual knowledge is realized knowledge. And that realized knowledge comes by devotion, devotional service. So hearing from devotees brings about spiritual knowledge because they're carrying devotional service. They are in contact with the devotional energy, the divine energy. And then that knowledge is imparted. And that's what's going on here between King Rahugana and Jad Bharat. Jad Bharat has spiritual knowledge. And he's imparting, he's situated in devotion, devotional service. And he's imparting that to Maharaj Rahugana. He has that dimension of devotion. In other words, these discussions are not just taking place on the mental plane, like studying physics or chemistry. These are not material subjects, these are spiritual subjects. And they're surcharged with devotion to the Lord. That energy of the Lord, devotion, is an energy of the Lord. It's a divine energy, devotion. So, with a little more studying, I may come up with the right words to use to describe the energy, whether it's one of his internal potencies, devotional service. So it requires, I have to do a little more digging to be able to speak more, quote, more nicely from the devotional sources. But just in simple language, this divine energy is an energy. When one comes in contact with it, just like coming in contact with electricity, you stick your finger in the socket, you get a shock. So this divine energy, this devotional energy, when it comes in contact with it, become enlivened. So these conversations are taking place on that level. So Maharaj Rahugana is going to get freed from wandering among different places and species of life in the material world, as he's come in contact with a carrier of this devotional service. And that's really where you get the devotional service, is by coming in contact with someone who is plugged in. You come in contact with them, then you get plugged in. This is a living energy, a living force. Prabhupada's commentary: when one's mind is absorbed in material conception, he thinks he belongs to a particular nation, family, country, or creed. These are all called upadhis, designations. One has to become freed from them. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam. As long as one is not freed, he has to continue conditioned life in material existence. The human form of life is meant for cleansing away these misconceptions. If this is not done, one has to repeat the cycle of birth and death, and thus suffer all material conditions. So that is the first step, to become freed from material conception. I think, I am this body, I belong to this family, this nation, this country, like that. You have to become freed from those designations to be able to realize the self as the soul. Text 16. The soul's designation, the mind, is the cause of all tribulations in the material world. As long as this fact is unknown to the conditioned living entity, he has to accept miserable condition of material body and wander within this universe in different positions. Because the mind is affected by disease, lamentation, illusion, attachment, greed, and enmity, it creates bondage and a false sense of intimacy within this material world. So Jad Bharat is enlivened to discuss these things with Maharaj Rahugana, because Maharaj Rahugana is open to hearing these things. So it's enlivening for Jad Bharat to speak about these things. So wherever and whenever someone is hearing nicely, it enlivens the speaker to speak on these transcendental subjects. So this discussion is, these words are pouring forth from Jad Bharat out of his own ecstasy and his own realization. They're pouring out of him, out of his mouth, into the ears and heart of Maharaj Rahugana. It's actually a heart-to-heart communication. And from within Jad Bharat's heart, the words are pouring out through his mouth into the ears of Maharaj Rahugana and then into his heart. So it's actually heart-to-heart communication, heartfelt. Prabhupada's commentary: the mind is the cause of both material bondage and liberation. The impure mind thinks, I am this body. The pure mind knows that he is not the material body. Therefore, the mind is considered to be the root of all material designations. Until the living entity is aloof from the association and contaminations of this material world, the mind will be absorbed in such material things as birth, death, disease, illusion, attachment, greed, and enmity. In this way, the living entity is conditioned and he suffers material miseries. So, this Bhagavatam has been translated with commentaries by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And his writings are pouring forth from his heart, heartfelt, through his writings and through his preaching, his speaking, into the ears, and when it's on the written page, through the eyes, into the hearts of those who take advantage of hearing from him. So that's disciplic succession, right there. The potent speaker, Srila Prabhupada is the potent speaker. His purports and his commentaries are filled with his own devotional outpourings. He's enlivened. He's enlivened to speak about Krishna because there's an audience that's willing to hear, willing to accept his books, his writings, who are eager to hear from him, who see that he has something extraordinary. They want to hear from him. So that is carried on. It's there originally in Jadbharat and Maharaj Rahugana, and now it's expanded further through the present-day saint and Acharya A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as he presents the same knowledge, being enlivened in the same way, coming from the same devotional platform, and reaching the hearts, ears and eyes and hearts of the living entities who are trapped within the material concept of life. So that's us. We're like the Maharaj Rahuganas, the little ones. And Prabhupada's like the Jad Bharat. Text 17. This uncontrolled mind is the greatest enemy of the living entity. If one neglects it or gives it a chance, it will grow more and more powerful and will become victorious. Although it's not factual, it's very strong. It covers the constitutional position of the soul. O king, please, try to conquer this mind by the weapon of service to the lotus feet of the spiritual master and of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Do this with great care. Yes, that's the magic formula. The lotus feet of the spiritual master and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So hearing is devotional service. So Maharaj Rahugana is engaged in devotional service by hearing from the spiritual master Jad Bharat. He's engaged in devotional service. And engaging in devotional service is the way to conquer this uncontrollable mind. Prabhupada's commentary. There's one easy weapon with which the mind can be conquered: neglect. The mind's always telling us, do this, do that. Therefore, we should be very expert in disobeying the mind's orders. And gradually the mind should be trained to obey the orders of the soul. It is not that one should obey the orders of the mind. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say that to control the mind, one should beat it with shoes many times just after awakening, and again before going to sleep. In this way, one can control the mind. This is the instruction of all the Shastras. If one does not do so, one is doomed to follow the dictations of the mind. Another bona fide process is to abide strictly by the orders of the spiritual master and engage in the Lord's service. Then the mind will be automatically controlled. So, that's interesting. 2 ways to deal with it. The mind, just ignore it. Just neglect the mind. Mind saying this, the mind saying that. Ignore it. Just ignore it. Another way is by engaging in devotional service. You're already busy. You're too busy to listen to the mind because you're busy doing something else. Then the mind will be automatically controlled by engaging in devotional service and following the orders of the spiritual master. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed Rupa Goswami Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. When one receives the seed of devotional service by the mercy of the Guru and Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one's life, real life, begins. If one abides by the orders of the spiritual master, by the grace of Krishna, he's freed from service to the mind. Yeah, it's like without acknowledging a higher master, the mind thinks it's the master. And so it controls its activities, and its this and that and whatever becomes the highest authority for the living entity until they recognize there is a higher authority than the mind. And that comes by becoming Krishna conscious, realizing the soul, the Supreme Lord is the higher authority. And that the mind is actually a servant and not the master. And that is done by meeting the representative of the Lord who gives the instructions. The pure devotee spiritual master is the external manifestation of the Lord within the heart. So there's agreement between the instructions given by the spiritual master and the instructions that the Lord is giving within the heart, which are covered by this intoxicated mind. The mind's intoxicated with itself, thinking that it's the highest authority is the mind. And that drags the living entity, birth after birth, lifetime after lifetime, listening to this mind, who's convinced it's the highest authority and has the best welfare of the living entity at heart. And that's why you should let the mind control everything, because the mind knows what it's doing. When in fact, there's a higher authority than the mind. Just like with the demigods, it's not necessary to worship the demigods, because the higher authority of the demigods is the Supreme Lord. And by worshiping the Supreme Lord, then demigods are automatically in their right position. They're automatically acknowledged. So similarly, the mind, by worshiping and serving the Lord, the Supreme Lord, and his representative, the spiritual master, then the mind is in its right position. The mind is also a servant. So everything becomes aligned properly for the actual benefit of the living entity. Yeah. If one abides by the orders of the spiritual master, by the grace of Krishna, he's freed from service to the mind. Yeah, the mind becomes a servant and not the master. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 5th canto, 11th chapter, Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Jad Bharat Instructs King Rahugana. I just never know what, when I open these pages, we just never know what new and exciting and enlivening things are going to come out. They're not material things, spiritual things are going to come out in that's kind of addictive like that. You just want to hear more and more and more. There's no end to the transcendental pleasures that come out of associating with the devotional energy as so graciously provided by the pure devotees. They leave their writings and their teachings. So there's a little summary here just ahead of the chapter. It's going to tell us what's coming. And this is Canto 5, Chapter 12. And this is a summary. Because Maharaj Rahugana was still doubtful about his enlightenment, he asked the Brahmin, Jadbharat, to repeat his instructions, clarify ideas he could not understand. In this chapter, Maharaj Rahugana offers his respectful obeisances to Jadbharat, who was concealing his real position. The king could understand by his speech how exalted and advanced he was in spiritual knowledge. He very much regretted his offense against him. Maharaj Rahugana was bitten by the serpent of ignorance, but was cured by the nectarine words of Jadbharat. Later, because he was doubtful about the subjects discussed, he made further inquiries, one question after another. First, he wanted to be released from the offense he had committed at the lotus feet of Jadbharat. Maharaj Rahugana was somewhat unhappy at not being able to grasp Jadbharat's instructions, which were full of meaning that could not be understood by a materialistic person. Therefore, Jadbharat repeated his instructions more clearly. He said that on the surface of the globe, all living entities, moving and unmoving, were but transformations of the earth in different ways. The king was very proud of his king's body, but that body was simply another transformation of the earth. Out of his false prestige, the king was misbehaving toward the palanquin carrier as a master toward a servant, and he was actually very unkind to other living entities. Consequently, King Rahugana was unfit to give protection to the citizens. Because he was ignorant, he was unfit to be counted among advanced philosophers. Everything in the material world is but a transformation of the earth, although things have different names according to their transformations. Actually, the varieties are one and the same, and ultimately all these varieties are vanquished into atoms. Nothing is permanent in this material world. The variety of things and their distinctions are simply mental concoctions. The absolute truth is beyond delusion. It is manifest in three features: impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ultimate realization of the absolute truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, called Vyāsadeva by his devotees. Unless one is blessed with the dust from the feet of a pure devotee on his head, one cannot possibly become a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jadbharat also told about his own previous birth and informed the king that by the grace of the Lord he still remembered all the incidents of his past life. Due to the activities of his past life, Jadbharat was being very cautious and was therefore assuming the characteristics of a deaf and dumb man to avoid mingling with the material world. Association with the material modes of nature is very powerful. The bad association of materialistic men can be avoided only in the association of devotees. In the association of devotees, one is given an opportunity to render devotional service in 9 different ways: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam Atma Nivedanam. In this way, in the association of devotees, one can pass over material association, cross over the ocean of nescience, return home, back to Godhead. So that's the summary. Now, go to text 1. King Rahugana said, "O most exalted personality, you are not different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By the influence of your true self, all kinds of contradiction in the Shastras have been removed. In the dress of a friend of a Brahmin, you're hiding your transcendental blissful position. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you." From the Brahma Samhita we understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of all causes, Sarva Karana Karanam. Vyāsadeva was the direct incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes. His son, Bharata Maharaj was now acting as the Brahmin Jad Bharat, had received his body from the cause of all causes. Therefore, he's addressed as Karana Vigrahaya. Text 2. O best of the Brahmins, my body is filled with dirty things. My vision has been bitten by the serpent of pride. Due to my material conceptions, I am diseased. Your nectarine instructions are the proper medicine for one suffering from such a fever, and they are cooling waters for one scorched by the heat. The conditioned soul has a body full of dirty things, bones, blood, urine, stool, so on. Nonetheless, the most intelligent men in this material world think there are combinations of blood, bone, urine, and stool. If this is so, why can't other intelligent men be made with these ingredients which are so readily available? The entire world is going on under the bodily conception, creating a hellish condition unfit for any gentleman's living. The instructions given to King Rahugana by Jad Bharat are very valuable. They're like the medicine that can save one from a snake bite. The Vedic instructions are like nectar and cool water for one suffering from scorching heat. Yes, in the age of Kali, when everything is so topsy-turvy, and leaders aren't qualified, religious leaders are unqualified, no one really seems to have access to the devotional service of the Lord. And everything's remaining hidden. The purpose of life is remaining hidden. And it's a field day for unrestricted sense gratification, hedonistic life, the degradation of society. Hearing these words from great souls like Jad Bharat and A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada have a cooling effect from this scorching heat of the constant barrage by the materially infected environment of human society. So Maharaj Rahugana is feeling that. He's feeling that cooling effect. And in a humble state, he's acknowledging his own contamination. So he's grateful. He's grateful for this medicine to relieve the disease, this transcendental knowledge coming from the devotee, surcharged with love for God. Text 3. Whatever doubts I have about a particular subject matter, I shall ask you about later. For the time being, these mysterious yoga instructions you have given me for self-realization appear very difficult to understand. Please repeat them in a simple way so I can understand them. My mind's very inquisitive. I want to understand this clearly. So that kind of inquiry, someone so eager or greedy, see that's the qualification we were reading the other day in some of the other Vaishnava literatures. This qualification is greed. So he's showing some greediness here, some eagerness, some enthusiasm. He wants to hear. This is very enlivening for the spiritual master, that the disciple wants to hear. Please tell me. Your words are life to me. So this is enlivening for Jad Bharat. Prabhupada's commentary, the Vedic literature instructs, Tasmat Gurum Prapadyata Jignasu Shreya Uttamam. An intelligent man must be very inquisitive to know the transcendental science deeply. Therefore, one must approach a guru, a spiritual master. Although Jad Bharat explained everything to Maharaj Rahugana, it appears that his intelligence was not perfect enough to understand clearly. He therefore requested further explanation. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidhi Pranipatena Pariprasnena Sevaya, the student must approach a spiritual master, surrender unto him fully, Pranipatena. He must also question him in order to understand his instructions, Pariprasnena. One should not only surrender to the spiritual master, but also render loving service unto him, so that the spiritual master will be pleased with the student and explain the transcendental subject matter more clearly. A challenging spirit before the spiritual master should be avoided if one is all interested in learning the Vedic instructions in depth. Should render loving service unto him. So we just heard in the previous verse there are 9 types of service: hearing, chanting, remembering, offering prayers, serving the lotus feet, worshiping, serving, making friends with, surrendering everything. These are devotional services. So Maharaj Rahugana is rendering sevaya by hearing nicely. That is seva, hearing nicely. He's not just like curious or inquisitive. He's actually desiring from his heart to enter into and understand and realize what's being spoken to him. He's begging for realization. That's the kind of inquisitiveness where these transmissions can take place. It's not like he just wants, the disciple just wants the knowledge that the spiritual master has. He wants the realization. Realization, I want to realize what you've realized. I'm eager for that. I'm greedy for that. I want that realization. So, I don't quite have it. So, could you try again, please? Have another round at it? Please. Tell me more. Try to explain it in a way that I can get the realization I'm so hankering for. There's conversations like that take place. These are transcendental conversations. A famous one is between Ramananda Roy and Lord Chaitanya. So, because Lord Chaitanya is presenting himself as a devotee of the Lord, he's inquiring from Ramananda Roy. The Lord's playing this part. These are his pastimes. Ramananda Roy is a realized soul. He's situated in love of God. So Lord Chaitanya takes the position of humbly inquiring from him, what is the goal of life? It's like Lord Chaitanya is like Maharaj Rahugana and Ramananda Roy is Jad Bharat. Okay, they're playing these parts. And then Ramananda Roy presents various conclusions. And his conclusions are correct. They may not just be the highest or the most all-inclusive answers. First he answers about, in the beginning he answers about the varnashram, if one follows one's duties. And then if one dedicates all of one's service in their duties or occupational duties in service to the Lord. And then if one gets knowledge, and then he goes on and on. each time the Lord says, please, there must be something more. I want a higher realization. I want more realization. Until eventually, Ramananda Roy, the highest answer he gives is spontaneous, loving, devotional service to the personality of Godhead in the mood of the Vrajbasis, specifically Srimati Radharani, in her mood of separation. And that's what Lord Chaitanya is looking for. Yes, that's the realization that I was looking for. Yes. So there's a similar kind of conversation going on here. Yes, you've explained these things, and in my intelligence I understand, but please, I'm looking for more realization. Please, oh Gurudev, please, give me more realization. Please. So, this is the kind of inquiry the spiritual master is looking for. This is how the transcendental messages of Godhead can be transmitted. With this kind of inquiry, qualified disciple or inquirer and the qualified speaker or representative. That's how it works. Text 4. O Master of yogic power, you say, fatigue resulting from moving the body here and there is appreciated by direct perception, but actually there's no fatigue. It simply exists as a matter of formality. By such inquiries and answers, no one can come to the conclusion of the absolute truth. Because of your presentation of this statement, my mind is a little disturbed. Prabhupada's commentary. Formal inquiries and answers about bodily conception do not constitute absolute knowledge of the absolute truth. Knowledge of the absolute truth is quite different from the formal understanding of bodily pains and pleasures. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna informs Arjuna that pains and pleasures experienced in relation to the body are temporary. They come and go. One should not be disturbed by them, but should tolerate them and continue with spiritual realization. So he wants to go a little deeper on that. 5 and 6. The self-realized Brahman Jai Bharat said, among the various material combinations and permutations, there are various forms and earthly transformations. For some reason, these move on the surface of the earth and are called pelican carriers. Those material transformations which do not move are gross material objects like stones. In any case, the material body is made of earth and stone in the form of feet, ankles, calves, knees, thighs, torso, throat, and head. Upon the shoulders is the wooden pelican, and within the pelican is the so-called king of Savira. The body of the king is simply another transformation of earth, but within that body your lordship is situated, falsely thinking you are the king of the state of Savira. So again, he's going into more different ways to look at this difference between spirit and matter. And this is speaking a little more directly here. Previously, it was spoken more like philosophically, but here there's a little bit of a personal element taking place, where more of a personal element taking place in his example, like he describes the gross material objects and made out of the various transformations of earth, and one of them's a pelican carrier, me. And then he describes there's a wooden pelican, and sitting in the wooden pelican is another transformation of earthly elements, and that's you. You're there inside that transformation. I'm inside this transformation, you're inside that transformation. So it's A little bit of a personal thing going on back and forth there. And you think you're the king of Suvera. So-called king of Suvera. So, maybe even a little chastisement there. Prabhupada's commentary: after analyzing material bodies of the Pelican carrier and the Pelican passenger, Jadmarat concludes that the real living force is the living entity. Yes, that would have to be, in order for them to have any kind of an actual loving exchange, they have to get on that platform of spiritual entities. They have to get beyond the designations. And if they get to that platform, then real transcendental knowledge can take place. So Jadmarat's chipping away at it, and the king also wants this. He wants that spiritual connection. And that's why he's allowing his false ego to be exposed like that, and to be for him to become purified of identifying with his external situation. Jadmarat concludes that the real living force is the living entity. Living entity is the offshoot or offspring of Lord Vishnu. Therefore, within this material world, among moving and non-moving things, the real principle is Lord Vishnu. Due to his presence, everything is working and there are actions and reactions. One who understands Lord Vishnu as the original cause of everything is to be understood to be perfectly situated in knowledge. Although he was falsely proud of being a king, King Rahugana was not really situated in knowledge. Therefore, he was rebuking the Pelican carriers, including the self-realized Brahman Jadmarat. This is the first accusation Jadmarat made against the king, who was daring to talk to a learned Brahmin from the flimsy ground of ignorance, identifying everything with matter. Yeah, so he's chastising Maharaj Rahugana. He's chastising him. You're not the king. Who do you think you are? King of Suvera. King Rahugana argued, the living entity is within the body, and when the body is fatigued, the living entity within must therefore be fatigued. It's clearly explained in the following verses that the living entity does not suffer due to the body's fatigue. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti gives an example of a child heavily decorated with ornaments. Although the child's body is very delicate, he does not feel fatigue, nor do the parents think that his ornaments should be taken away. The living entity has nothing to do with bodily pains and pleasures. These are simply mental concoctions. An intelligent man will find the original cause of everything. Material combinations and permutations may be a matter of fact in worldly dealings. It's actually, the living entity is forced at different times to come to that conclusion. In times of great stress or physical debility, an accident or a disease, they're actually forced to not identify with the body. There's as many cases of people with out-of-body experience. That was the subtle body pulling the soul out of the gross body, which for one reason or other may not be functional, either comatose or under anesthesia or in an accident or something. And of course, at the time of death, you can't identify with the gross body anymore. So there, by hearing, although one may be situated in the gross and subtle material bodies, and may not be at that level where they can tolerate just about anything and not feel pain or tired, and not identify with it because it's the body that's tired or in pain, it's not the soul, but may not be at that point of not identifying with it. At least having heard these messages, it may be possible at some of these most intense times to realize that knowledge. When put to the test, they may get some realization. For the most part, going through the day, pretty much identifying, oh, I'm hungry, oh, I'm tired, oh, my foot hurts, oh, this, oh, that, me. So constant practice, always hearing, and little bit, becoming more and more attracted to the personality of Godhead, who's beyond the whole material creation, the whole material scene. Little bit, gradual progress. It's never lost, whatever someone does in the advancement of realization of the relationship with the Lord, whether or not this body, aham brahmasmi, it's never lost. It can get sidetracked for a while, but pick right up where you left off. So there's no loss, whatever a person does. It's all good, and it's beyond good. So the living entity has nothing to do with bodily pains and pleasures. These are simply mental concoctions. An intelligent man will find the original cause of everything. Material combinations and permutations may be a matter of fact in worldly dealings, but actually the living force, the soul, has nothing to do with them. Those who are materially upset take care of the body, manufacture Daridra Narayan, poor Narayan. However, it's not a fact that the soul or supersoul becomes poor simply because the body is poor. These are the statements of ignorant people. The soul and the supersoul are always apart from bodily pleasure and pain. And this is our great opportunity in this lifetime to get these realizations. A great opportunity. Hare Krishna.